The dusty street of Ruby City, Idaho blurred through Penelope Thompson's tears as she stumbled out of the land office, clutching a crumpled notice that might as well have been her death sentence. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalk, and she pressed herself against the rough timber wall, fighting to catch her breath between sobs that threatened to shake her entire body apart. Her father had been dead 6 months now, killed when his horse threw him during a storm, and she had only just discovered the catastrophic extent of the debts he had left behind, $3,000. The number swam before her eyes, impossibly large, utterly devastating. The bank wanted their money within 30 days, or they would seize everything her family owned, including the small ranch 5 miles outside town where she had lived her entire 21 years. Her mother's grave sat on that land, beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek, and the thought of strangers owning it, of being forbidden from visiting that sacred spot, made her stomach twist with nausea. Penelope tried to compose herself, aware that people were passing by on the street, their curious glances making her skin burn with humiliation. She pressed her hands to her face, willing herself to stop crying, to think clearly, to find some solution that did not exist. She had already sold everything of value, every piece of her mother's jewelry, every spare horse, every cow they could manage without. The ranch barely supported her, and the 2 ranch hands who had stayed on out of loyalty to her father's memory. There was no possible way to earn $3,000 in 30 days. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and gentle, tinged with concern that sounded genuine rather than merely curious. Penelope looked up through her tears to see a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His gray eyes held something she had not seen much of lately, genuine kindness without pity. "I'm fine," she lied automatically, her voice breaking on the words. She clutched the notice tighter, as if hiding it could somehow make the problem disappear. The man did not move closer, but he did not leave either. "Forgive me for saying so, miss, but you do not look fine. Is there someone I can fetch for you? A family member, perhaps?" "There is no one." The words came out harsher than she intended, and she saw him flinch slightly. She took a shaking breath, trying to find some semblance of her usual composure. "I apologize. That was rude. I'm having a difficult day, but it is not your concern." "Perhaps not," he agreed, still making no move to leave. "But my mother raised me to help folks in trouble when I can." "My name is Porter Irwin. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here." Penelope had heard the name. Porter Irwin had moved to the area 2 years ago and built up one of the more prosperous ranches in the territory. People spoke of him as fair and hardworking, a man who paid his debts and kept his word. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, feeling foolish and exposed. "Penelope Thompson," she said quietly. "My father was Samuel Thompson." Recognition flickered in Porter's eyes. "I knew him. He sold me 3 horses about a year ago, fine animals. He was a good man, and I was sorry to hear of his passing." He paused, then added carefully, "I heard he had a daughter running the ranch now. That must be difficult work." "It was manageable until today." The words escaped before she could stop them, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She was so tired of being strong, of pretending everything would somehow work out. The crushing weight of responsibility and fear finally broke through her defenses, and she found herself speaking to this stranger with desperate honesty. "The bank is calling in his debts. $3,000. I have 30 days, and there is no possible way I can raise that much money. They will take everything." Porter's expression grew serious, his jaw tightening. $3,000 is a substantial sum. Your father borrowed that much. Apparently, he had been borrowing for years, trying to keep the ranch going after my mother died. I had no idea how bad things were. He never told me. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She had loved her father deeply, but learning about the debts felt like a betrayal, as if he had not trusted her enough to share the burden. "May I see the notice?" Penelope hesitated, then handed him the crumpled paper. There seemed little point in hiding it now. Porter read through it carefully, his frown deepening. When he looked up, his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "This is from Gerald Hawkins at the Territorial Bank." Yes, he was very clear about the terms. 30 days or he forecloses. Porter's mouth tightened into a thin line. Hawkins is known for being ruthless. He has taken more than a few properties around here. He was quiet for a moment, studying the paper, then looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. What if the debt was paid? Penelope laughed, a broken sound without humor. "Then I would not be standing here crying in the street. But as I said, there is no way I can raise that money. What if I paid it?" The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that for a moment Penelope was not certain she had heard correctly. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of jest or cruelty, but found only that same serious intensity. "That is not amusing," she said finally, her voice cold. "I am not joking." Porter folded the notice carefully and held it out to her. "I have the money. I will pay your father's debts. Why would you possibly do that? You do not even know me." Suspicion warred with desperate hope in her chest. No one did something like that without expecting something in return, and the thought of what he might want made her feel sick. Porter seemed to sense her fear. His expression softened, and he took a small step back, as if to give her more space. "I am not asking for anything in return, Miss Thompson. I know how that must sound, but I mean it. My own father died in debt when I was younger. I watched my mother lose everything, watched her heart break as strangers took the home she had built with him. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would help others avoid that same pain. $3,000 is an enormous sum." Penelope's voice shook. She wanted desperately to believe him, but it seemed impossible, too good to be true. "I have been fortunate in my investments. The money will not ruin me if that is your concern." He met her eyes steadily. "I know you have no reason to trust me. We are strangers. But I am making you this offer in good faith, with no expectations beyond perhaps your friendship someday, if you are willing to give it." Penelope felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her mind raced, trying to find the trap, the hidden price she would be expected to pay. But when she looked into Porter Irwin's eyes, she saw only honesty and that same gentle kindness that had made him stop in the first place. "I do not understand," she whispered. "People do not do things like this. Perhaps they should." Porter put his hat back on, then gestured down the street toward the bank. "Come with me now if you are willing. We will settle this debt today and you can go home knowing your ranch is safe." "I cannot possibly accept such a gift." "Then consider it a loan if that makes you more comfortable. Pay me back when and if you are able, or do not pay me back at all. Either way, I do not want you to lose your home." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Miss Thompson, I can see you are frightened and overwhelmed. Let me help, please." Penelope looked down at the notice in her hands, at the words that spelled out the destruction of everything she had left in the world. Then she looked back at Porter Irwin, at this stranger, who was offering her a miracle for no reason she could understand. Every practical instinct told her to be cautious, to question his motives, to protect herself. But desperation and something deeper, some instinct she could not name, made her nod slowly. "All right," she said, her voice barely audible. "All right." The walk to the bank felt surreal, as if she were moving through a dream. Porter kept a respectful distance beside her, not touching her or trying to take her arm, simply walking at her pace. When they entered the bank, Gerald Hawkins looked up from his desk with the satisfied expression of a cat that had caught a mouse. His smile faded when he saw Porter. "Mr. Irwin, what brings you here today?" "I am here to settle the Thompson debt." Porter's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "I understand it is $3,000 due in 30 days. I would like to pay it in full today." Hawkins's eyes widened, then narrowed with calculation. He looked between Porter and Penelope, and something unpleasant crossed his face. "I see. And what is your interest in this matter, Mr. Irwin?" "That is my business." Porter pulled out a leather wallet and began counting out bills with practiced efficiency. "The debt is $3,000. Here is your payment. I will need a receipt showing the debt is paid in full, and all claims against the Thompson property are void." "Now hold on," Hawkins said, standing up. "There are papers to draw up, agreements about transferring the debt from Miss Thompson to yourself." "There will be no transfer. I am paying the debt, not assuming it. Once this money is in your hands, there is no debt. Miss Thompson owes nothing to your bank, and her property is clear." Penelope watched the exchange with her heart pounding. Hawkins clearly did not like losing his leverage over her property, but there was nothing he could legally do. With obvious reluctance, he counted the money twice, then drew up a receipt. Porter read it carefully before nodding, then handed it to Penelope. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said quietly. "It proves the debt is paid." Outside, Penelope stood on the boardwalk holding the receipt, unable to fully process what had just happened. Porter had given away $3,000, an amount most people did not see in years of hard work, and he had done it for a woman he had met less than an hour ago. "I do not know what to say," she managed finally. "Thank you seems impossibly inadequate. It is enough." Porter smiled at her, and she noticed how it transformed his serious face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "Go home, Miss Thompson. Take care of your ranch. That is all the thanks I need. Will I see you again?" The question escaped before she could consider whether it was appropriate. Something about this man drew her, made her want to know more about someone who could perform such an act of generosity. Porter's smile widened slightly. "If you would like. I come to Ruby City every week or so for supplies. Perhaps I might call on you sometime if that would not be presumptuous." "I would like that." Penelope felt color rising in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I would like that very much." "Then I will see you soon, Miss Thompson." "Penelope," she said softly. "Please call me Penelope." "Penelope." He tipped his hat to her, and she watched as he walked toward the general store, still half convinced she had imagined the entire encounter. The ride home felt different than the ride into town had been. The same landscape that had seemed oppressive and threatening this morning now looked beautiful in the late afternoon light. The Boys Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow even in late July. Sagebrush and wildflowers dotted the valleys, and the Awahi River glinted like silver where it curved through the land. When Penelope reached the ranch, her two hands, Tom and Charlie, came out of the barn to meet her. They were both older men who had worked for her father for years, and their faces were creased with worry. "How bad is it, Miss Penelope?" Tom asked, pulling off his hat. Penelope dismounted and pulled the receipt from her pocket, holding it up like a trophy. "The debt is paid. The ranch is safe." Charlie's jaw dropped. "How in blazes did you manage that?" "A man named Porter Irwin paid it, all of it. He asked for nothing in return." The two men exchanged glances, and she saw the same disbelief she had felt. "Porter Irwin," Tom said slowly. "I know him. He has the big spread north of here. Good reputation. But why would he pay your debts?" He said his own mother lost everything when his father died. He did not want to see it happen to someone else. Even saying it aloud, it sounded impossible, like something from a fairy tale. "That is either the most generous act I have ever heard of, or there is something more to it," Charlie said, but his tone was not unkind. "Either way, it is good news for us. I will admit, I have been losing sleep worrying about what would happen." "So have I." Penelope looked around at the ranch, at the barn her grandfather had built, at the house where she had been born, at the distant cottonwood that marked her mother's grave. "I thought we had lost everything. Now we have a second chance." That night, Penelope lay in her bed unable to sleep, her mind returning again and again to Porter Irwin. She replayed every word of their conversation, trying to understand what had happened. In her experience, men did not give away fortunes without expecting something in return. Yet Porter had seemed entirely sincere in his lack of expectations. He had not tried to touch her, had not made any inappropriate suggestions, had simply paid the debt and walked away. But he had said he would call on her. The thought made her stomach flutter with something that was not quite anxiety and not quite excitement. She barely knew him, and yet something about him had stirred feelings she had not experienced in years. Since her mother's death 5 years ago, she had been too busy helping her father, and then running the ranch alone to think much about courting or marriage. The few men who had expressed interest had wanted a wife who would give up the ranch, who would let them take control of her property and her life. She had refused them all, but Porter had not asked for control of anything. He had given freely and walked away. The novelty of it was almost as staggering as the generosity itself. The next few days passed in a blur of work. There were cattle to tend, fences to mend, 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Penelope threw herself into the work, grateful for the physical exhaustion that let her sleep at night without her mind spinning in circles. But she found herself watching the road that led to town, wondering when Porter might appear. A week after their meeting, Tom came to find her while she was working in the vegetable garden behind the house. "Someone coming up the road, Miss Penelope. Looks like Porter Irwin." Penelope's heart jumped, and she immediately felt foolish for her reaction. She brushed dirt from her hands and checked her appearance, wishing she had time to change out of her work clothes and do something with her hair, which had escaped its braid and was sticking to her sweaty forehead. Porter rode up on a handsome bay gelding and dismounted when he saw her coming around the house. He looked much as he had in town, dressed in practical work clothes that showed he was no stranger to ranch labor. His face lit up when he saw her, and that smile made her pulse quicken. "Penelope." "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all. I am glad to see you." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come in? I can make coffee." "I would like that very much." Inside, Penelope busied herself with the coffee pot, acutely aware of Porter's presence in the small kitchen. The house was clean but shabby, showing its age and the years of minimal maintenance. She felt self-conscious about it, about the threadbare curtains and the worn floorboards, comparing it to what she imagined Porter's ranch house must look like. "You have a nice place here," Porter said, as if reading her thoughts. "Good land, solid buildings. Your father built something to be proud of." He tried. Penelope set out 2 cups and brought the coffee pot to the table. "Some days I feel like I am barely holding it together. Other days I think maybe I can make it work." "You will make it work." Porter's confidence was matter of fact, not patronizing. "I can see you are a hard worker and you clearly know the land. That counts for more than money in the long run." They talked for over an hour, and Penelope was surprised by how easy it was. Porter asked about the ranch, about her plans for it, actually listening to her answers with genuine interest. He told her about his own spread, about the years of work it had taken to build it up, about the satisfaction of seeing something grow from nothing. "How did you get started?" Penelope asked. You said your mother lost everything when your father died. Porter's expression grew more serious, and he turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. She did. We moved to her sister's house in Illinois, lived as charity cases for several years. My mother never recovered from the loss. She died when I was 18, and I think as much from heartbreak as from the fever. He was quiet for a moment. I worked any job I could find, saved every penny. When I was 22, I had enough to come west and buy a small piece of land. I have been building on it ever since. I am sorry about your mother. Thank you. It was a long time ago, but I think experiences like that shape us. It is why I could not walk past you that day in town. I saw my mother in your tears, saw that same desperation and fear. If I could spare you what she went through, then the money was well spent. Penelope reached across the table and touched his hand, a brief gesture of gratitude and connection. You saved my life, Porter, or at least the life I want to live. I will never forget that. Porter's hand turned under hers, his fingers briefly curling around hers before releasing. I am glad I could help. When Porter finally stood to leave, Penelope walked him out to his horse. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Porter swung into the saddle, then looked down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. May I come again? Perhaps next week. I would like that, Penelope said, unable to keep the smile from her face. I would like that very much. She watched him ride away, one hand lifted in farewell, and felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It was too soon to call it love, too fragile to put into words, but it was there nonetheless, a seed of possibility that had not existed a week ago. Porter came the following week, and the week after that, and soon his visits became the highlight of Penelope's routine. Sometimes he helped with work around the ranch, his skilled hands making quick work of repairs she had been putting off for lack of time or expertise. Other times they simply talked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, learning the thousand small details that make up a person's life. Penelope found herself thinking about him constantly during the weeks between visits. She replayed their conversations, hoarded small details like treasures. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with horses, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him even in repose. It was Charlie who finally voiced what both ranch hands were clearly thinking. That Irwin fellow is sweet on you, Miss Penelope. Penelope felt her cheeks heat. We are just friends. Friends do not ride 30 miles round trip every week just to help mend fences, Tom added, his tone gentle. And friends do not look at each other the way you two do. How do we look at each other? Like you are the only two people in the world. Charlie grinned at her discomfort. It is good to see, Miss Penelope. You deserve some happiness. The truth was, Penelope was falling in love with Porter Irwin, and she suspected he felt the same way about her. But neither of them had spoken the words aloud, as if afraid that naming the feeling might somehow break the spell. They existed in a careful state of possibility, each visit bringing them closer together while still maintaining a careful distance. It was in late September, 3 months after their first meeting, that everything changed. Porter had come for his usual weekly visit, but he seemed distracted, almost nervous. They had been sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a comfortable silence between them, when he suddenly stood and paced to the railing. Penelope, there is something I need to say to you. Her heart began to pound. All right. Porter turned to face her, his expression intense. These past few months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I do not see you feels empty, and every time I have to leave here it gets harder. I think you know what I am trying to say. Penelope stood and moved closer to him, close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Tell me anyway. I am in love with you." The words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it might seem too soon, or maybe you do not feel the same way, but I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is merely friendship. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. I love your strength, your determination, the way you laugh, the way you care for this land and the people who depend on you. I love everything about you, Penelope Thompson, and I needed you to know that." Penelope felt tears prickling at her eyes, but these were nothing like the desperate tears she had cried on that awful day in town. These were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming emotion finally finding release. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it, afraid that maybe I was imagining what I felt from you, or that it was too soon, or that loving someone who had done so much for me was somehow wrong. But I do love you, Porter. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." Porter closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. Penelope's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to tilt around them. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, tender yet passionate, a perfect expression of the feelings they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, Porter rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Marry me, Penelope. I know it is fast, and if you want to wait, I will wait as long as you need. But I want to spend my life with you, to build a future together, to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my days." "Yes," Penelope laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Yes, I will marry you." Porter swept her up in his arms, spinning her around on the porch while she clung to him, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Penelope felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was right. This was what she wanted. They decided to marry in early November, giving them time to make arrangements but not waiting longer than necessary. Neither of them saw the point in a long engagement when they both knew what they wanted. Porter spent the intervening weeks helping Penelope prepare the ranch for winter, working alongside Tom and Charlie to ensure everything was secure before the snow came. The wedding was small, held in the church in Ruby City with only a handful of guests. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk at the bottom of her wardrobe. It needed taking in and some repairs, but when she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt her mother's presence, as if blessing this union. Porter wore a new suit, his dark hair freshly cut, his eyes never leaving Penelope as she walked down the aisle toward him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Porter's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise for the life they were beginning together. The question of where they would live had been a difficult one. Porter had his ranch, and Penelope had hers. In the end, they decided to keep both properties, spending time at each and eventually combining the operations. It would be more work, but it would also be more prosperous, and it meant Penelope did not have to give up the land her family had worked for generations. Their first months of marriage were an education in learning to live with another person, learning each other's habits and quirks. Porter left his boots wherever he took them off, and Penelope hoarded the last cup of coffee in the morning. He snored slightly when he slept on his back, and she stole all the blankets. These small domestic discoveries delighted them both, evidence of the real, lived intimacy they were building. But it was not all blissful. There were arguments about how to run the ranches, about money, about whose opinion should prevail on various decisions. Penelope had been independent for so long that sometimes she chafed at having to consult someone else. and Porter had his own fixed ideas about how things should be done. They learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to compromise when compromise was possible, and to take turns yielding when it was not. Through it all, the love between them deepened and matured. What had begun as passion and gratitude transformed into something more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They were not just lovers but friends, confidants, partners in building a life together. In the spring of their first year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her own mother had died from fever when Penelope was 16, and she had no female relatives to guide her through the experience. Porter was delighted but anxious, insisting that Penelope not work too hard, hovering over her with a protectiveness that was both endearing and occasionally irritating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a saddle. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. Other women were not carrying my child." Porter took the saddle from her anyway, his expression stubborn. "Let me take care of you, Penelope, please." She softened at the genuine worry in his voice. "I promise to be careful. But you have to let me be useful. I will go mad if you try to keep me wrapped in cotton." They compromised as they always did. Penelope continued working but avoided the heaviest tasks, and Porter tried not to worry himself sick every time she went out of his sight. By late summer, as her pregnancy advanced, she spent more time in the house, sewing baby clothes and preparing the small room off their bedroom as a nursery. The baby came in early December, after a long and difficult labor that left Porter pacing holes in the floor downstairs, while the doctor and a midwife from town attended Penelope. When he finally heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. The doctor emerged from the bedroom, his sleeves rolled up and his face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Irwin, a healthy boy. Your wife is asking for you." Porter took the stairs 2 at a time. Penelope was propped up in bed, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but radiant with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, a small red face just visible at one end. "Come meet your son," Penelope said softly. Porter approached almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the baby. When he reached the bed, Penelope carefully transferred the infant to his arms. Porter held his son with the awkward care of someone who had never held a baby before, terrified of doing something wrong, overwhelmed by the fragility of this new life. "He is perfect," Porter whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, never quite settling on one they both loved. But looking down at his son's face, Porter suddenly knew. "Samuel," he said. "Samuel Thompson Irwin, after your father, if that is all right with you." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "It is more than all right. It is perfect." Baby Samuel was a good-natured child, blessed with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He transformed their lives completely, filling the house with sounds it had never known, demanding attention and care at all hours. Penelope was exhausted but happier than she had ever been, watching Porter with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed as he learned to change diapers and soothe crying fits. The ranches prospered under their combined management. They had good luck with cattle prices, and Porter's business acumen combined with Penelope's knowledge of the land proved to be a powerful combination. By Samuel's second birthday, they had paid off the remaining debts on Penelope's original ranch and were expanding their herd. But their greatest wealth was not measured in cattle or land. It was measured in the love that filled their home, in the laughter of their son, In the quiet evenings when Porter and Penelope sat together on the porch watching the sunset, hands entwined, content in the life they had built together. When Samuel was 3, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She was smaller than her brother had been, with a full head of blonde hair that surprised them both, and a disposition that could only be described as fierce. Where Samuel had been placid and easy, Grace demanded attention, refused to be ignored, and showed signs even in infancy of having inherited her mother's stubborn will. "She is going to be a handful," Porter said one night, watching his daughter wave her tiny fists in the air and yell for no apparent reason. "She is going to be magnificent," Penelope replied, smiling down at her baby girl. "Just like her grandmother." Porter leaned over and kissed his wife's temple. "Just like her mother." The years passed in the way years do when life is good, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, the 1,000 small crises that make up life on a ranch. But through it all, Porter and Penelope faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Grace was wild and fearless, climbing trees and racing her pony across the fields, giving her parents endless gray hairs with her adventures. They were opposites in many ways, but fiercely devoted to each other, a team against the world, when Samuel was 8 and Grace was 5. Penelope gave birth to twin boys, James and William. The pregnancy had been unexpected, and the discovery that she was carrying twins had sent Porter into a near panic. But both boys arrived healthy and squalling, identical in appearance but different in temperament from their first breath. Their home was chaos now, filled with children's voices and laughter, with toys scattered across every surface and the constant noise that comes with a large family. Porter would sometimes catch Penelope's eye across the dinner table, both of them surrounded by their children, and share a smile that spoke of shared exhaustion and profound contentment. On quiet evenings, after the children were finally asleep, Porter and Penelope would sit together on the porch as they had done since the beginning of their marriage. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, about plans for the future, about the children and their developing personalities. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. "You ever think about that day in town?" Penelope asked one such evening, her head resting on Porter's shoulder. "The day we met." "Every day," Porter replied. "I think about how easily I might have walked past you, might have convinced myself it was not my business to interfere. I think about how different my life would be without you. I was so desperate that day. I thought my world was ending." Penelope turned to look up at him. "I could never have imagined that the man who stopped to help me would become my entire world." Porter kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, a familiar sequence that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "I told you then that I wanted nothing in return. That was true. But what I got back was worth more than all the money in the world. I got you and this life and our children. I am the one who benefited from that bargain." "We both did," Penelope said softly. "We both found exactly what we needed, even though neither of us knew we were looking for it." As the years continued to pass, the Irwin family became a fixture in the Ruby City community. Porter served on the town council, using his business sense to help guide the growing settlement. Penelope became known for her generosity, often helping other families who faced hardships, remembering her own desperate day in Porter's kindness. They never forgot what it was like to struggle, and they made sure their children understood the value of hard work and the importance of helping others. Samuel, Grace, James, and William all grew up knowing the story of how their parents met, of the debt paid without expectation of return, of the love that had bloomed from an act of compassion. Samuel inherited his father's steady nature and his mother's love of the land. He worked the ranch alongside Porter, learning everything his father could teach him about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. When he was 22, he married a schoolteacher from Boise, a gentle woman named Catherine who fit perfectly into the family. Grace, true to her childhood nature, refused to be bound by conventional expectations. She learned to rope and ride as well as any man, and when she was 19, she shocked the family by announcing her intention to attend college in San Francisco. Porter and Penelope supported her decision, even as it pained them to have her so far away. She wrote long letters home, full of her studies and her adventures, and visited as often as she could. The twins, James and William, were inseparable throughout their childhood and remained so as they grew. They worked the ranch together, finished each other's sentences, and eventually married sisters, building houses next to each other on the property. Their wives found the twin situation occasionally confusing but ultimately endearing, and soon there was a new generation of children running through the ranch, keeping everyone young. Porter's hair went gray, then white, but his love for Penelope never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with age, enriched by decades of shared experiences, by joys and sorrows weathered together. Penelope's face gained lines. Her hands grew gnarled from years of hard work, but to Porter she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her crying on that street in Ruby City. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across the territory. Their children organized everything, transforming the ranch into a festive gathering place. As the evening drew to a close, Porter stood and raised a glass. 30 years ago, I met a woman who was crying over debts she could not pay. I paid those debts and thought that was the end of it, a simple act of kindness with no further significance. He looked at Penelope, his eyes shining with emotion. I had no idea that I was buying myself the greatest treasure of my life. Penelope, you have given me everything. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on a stranger, for building this beautiful life with me. Penelope stood and moved to his side, taking his hand. You gave me back my life when you paid those debts, Porter. But more than that, you gave me yourself, freely and without conditions. You taught me that real love is about giving, not taking, about partnership, not possession. These 30 years have been the greatest gift I could ever receive. They kissed, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends who had known them from the beginning of their story. It was a kiss that spoke of enduring love, of commitment renewed every day, of a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Porter and Penelope found themselves once again on their porch, watching the stars emerge. It was the place where their love had first been spoken aloud, where countless important conversations had happened over the decades, where they had always returned to find peace and connection. You have any regrets? Penelope asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Porter considered the question seriously, as he always did her inquiries. Only that I did not meet you sooner, so we could have had even more time together. But I suppose if we had met sooner, we would have been different people. Maybe the timing was exactly right. I think it was. I needed to learn how to stand on my own before I could truly be a partner to someone. And you needed to build your ranch, to become the man who could stop and help a stranger without hesitation. Penelope squeezed his hand. Everything happened exactly as it should have. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and complete. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Somewhere in the house, one of their grandchildren laughed at something, the sound carrying through an open window. "I love you, Penelope Irwin," Porter said, as he had said countless times over the years. The words never lost their power, never became routine or empty. They were always true, always meant with his whole heart. "I love you too, Porter, I always will." More years passed, each one a gift. Porter and Penelope gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Samuel and the twins take over while they enjoyed the fruits of their decades of labor. They traveled some, visiting Grace in San Francisco and exploring parts of the country they had never seen. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and sustained them through all the years of their marriage. When Porter was 68, he had a scare with his heart that sent the entire family into a panic. The doctor ordered rest and less strenuous work, pronouncements that Porter grumbled about but ultimately obeyed because he could not stand to see the worry in Penelope's eyes. He recovered, but the incident reminded them both that their time was finite, that every day together was precious. "We have been blessed," Penelope said one evening after Porter had recovered. "So many years together, so many memories. Whatever time we have left, I am grateful for all of it." "I intend to give you many more years," Porter replied, pulling her close. "I am not ready to leave you yet, my love. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet." He kept that promise. Porter lived to be 82, his mind sharp and his love for Penelope undiminished even as his body grew frail. He died peacefully in his sleep, with Penelope beside him as she had been for 56 years of marriage. His last words to her, whispered in the darkness of their bedroom, were the same words he had spoken on their first kiss. "I love you." Penelope grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had been blessed with more than half a century with a man who had loved her completely, who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined possible on that desperate day in Ruby City. She was surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them evidence of the love she and Porter had shared. She lived for 3 more years after Porter's death, remaining active and involved with the ranch and her family. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch where she and Porter had spent so many hours, talking to him as if he were still beside her, feeling his presence in every familiar creak of the wood, every whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. When Penelope died at 85, her family buried her next to Porter on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The marker read, "Penelope Thompson Irwin, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was loved beyond measure." On the day of her funeral, Samuel stood before the assembled crowd and told the story his parents had told him as a child. The story of how a cowboy had seen a woman crying over debts and had paid them all, asking for nothing in return. How that single act of kindness had blossomed into a love story that spanned more than 5 decades, that had created a family, that had built something lasting and beautiful. "My father always said he got the better end of that bargain," Samuel concluded, his voice breaking. "He paid $3,000 and received a lifetime of love in return. But my mother would say she got the better deal, receiving not just freedom from debt, but a partner who loved her unconditionally." The truth is they were both right. They gave each other everything, and in doing so, they gave all of us the greatest gift, an example of what real love looks like. Grace stood beside her brother, tears streaming down her face. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new every day. That generosity without expectation creates bonds stronger than any contract. That true partnership means supporting each other's dreams, not just your own. The twins spoke together as they always had, finishing each other's sentences. "They built this ranch together," James said. "But more importantly, they built a family," William continued. "A legacy of love and kindness," James added. "That will continue long after we are all gone," William finished. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house, filling it with the same warmth and love that had always characterized the home. Children played in the yard where Porter and Penelope had played with their own children decades before. The adults shared memories, stories of their parents and grandparents, laughing through their tears. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the family gathered on the porch. It seemed fitting, a tribute to all the evenings Porter and Penelope had spent in that exact spot. Someone started humming a tune, and others joined in, creating an impromptu harmony that drifted across the land. The ranch that had nearly been lost to debt had become a thriving enterprise, home to 4 generations of family. The love story that had begun with a stranger's kindness had created ripples that extended far beyond 2 people, touching everyone who knew them, inspiring acts of generosity and compassion that echoed Porter's original gift. In the years that followed, the story of Porter and Penelope became something of a legend in Ruby City and the surrounding territory. Parents told it to their children as an example of true love and kindness. Young couples starting out would visit the graves on the hill, hoping some of that enduring love would bless their own unions. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Each new owner added their own chapter to the story, but they never forgot the foundation on which everything was built. A cowboy who paid a debt with no expectation of return, and a woman who had loved him for it, creating a partnership that had withstood every challenge life could throw at them. The twin cottonwood trees that marked Porter and Penelope's graves grew tall and strong, their branches intertwining overhead as if even in death, the two were inseparable. Wildflowers bloomed around the markers every spring, planted by family members who wanted to honor the couple who had started it all. Samuel's children grew up hearing about their grandparents, absorbing the lessons of generosity and partnership. They in turn passed those lessons to their own children, creating a family culture built on the values Porter and Penelope had embodied. The Irwin name became synonymous with integrity and kindness throughout Idaho, a reputation that began with $3,000 freely given on a dusty street in Ruby City. Decades after Penelope's death, on a hot July day remarkably similar to the one when she and Porter had met, one of their great-great-granddaughters stood in front of the land office in Ruby City. She was looking at papers detailing her own small ranch, feeling overwhelmed by the challenges ahead of her. A young man stopped, concerned by the worry on her face, and asked if he could help. She told him the story her grandmother had told her about Porter and Penelope, about the debt paid and the love that followed. The young man listened, moved by the tale, and when she finished, he said, "That is a beautiful story. It reminds us that sometimes helping someone is not about what we get back, but about what we can give." She smiled, seeing in his kindness an echo of her great-great-grandfather. "It is a true story. It is my family's story." And it taught all of us that love and generosity create legacies that last far longer than money or land. They talked for a while longer, and by the time they parted, she felt lighter, more hopeful. She did not know if she would see the young man again, but the encounter had reminded her of where she came from, of the strength and love that ran through her family line. That evening, she rode out to the hill where Porter and Penelope were buried. She sat between their graves, running her fingers over the worn letters of their names, feeling connected to ancestors she had never met but whose influence had shaped her entire life. "Thank you," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "Thank you for teaching us what real love looks like. Thank you for building something that lasted. Thank you for showing us that one act of kindness can change everything." The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and for a moment she could almost hear voices, gentle and loving, assuring her that everything would be all right. She sat there until the stars came out, the same stars Porter and Penelope had watched together for 56 years, and felt at peace. The story of Porter and Penelope Irwin became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, to the incredible things that can grow from a single selfless act. It showed that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through joy and sorrow, about creating something that lasts. Their legacy was not just the prosperous ranch or the large family they had created. It was the example they set, the values they lived, the love they shared so openly that it could not help but influence everyone around them. They proved that sometimes the best investments are not in land or cattle, but in people, in relationships, in acts of kindness that ripple outward in ways we cannot always see or measure. Porter had stopped to help a crying woman because his own mother's suffering had taught him the value of compassion. In doing so, he had found the love of his life, built a family, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Penelope, in accepting his help and opening her heart to him, had found not just salvation from debt, but a partner who would stand beside her through everything life brought. Together, they had proved that the best stories are not the ones we plan, but the ones that unfold when we are brave enough to be kind, generous enough to give without expecting return, and open enough to let love in when it arrives unexpectedly on a dusty street in a small Idaho town. The ranch still stands, prosperous and thriving, home to the descendants of Porter and Penelope Irwin. The land that almost was lost to debt instead became the foundation for something beautiful and enduring. And on warm summer evenings, if you listen carefully, you might hear echoes of laughter, of conversations held on an old porch, of two people who found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. Their graves on the hill overlook everything they created together, and the cottonwoods continue to grow, their branches forever intertwined, a living symbol of a love that began with tears and a stranger's kindness, and lasted far beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. It is a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest gestures, and that real love, once found, never truly ends but continues to echo through generations, inspiring and uplifting all who hear its story.